Hello there. He knelt before BLM over George Floyd. He knelt before Mauritius over Chagos. He will now kneel before the Brussels Eurocrats to give them everything they want. The unfinished battle against Brexit continues apace, as those who think they know better than the average voter and who have anti-UK vested interests are backing Keir Starmer, our very own Prime Minister, to next week hand the UK over to the Brussels Eurocrats on a silver platter. And that is exactly the Starmer plan, because whether he realises it or not, the EU has its own cunning plan. First, they insist on taking UK fish before any talks start, then they take your sovereignty, leaving us in the hope that we will get something back in the future. It worked during Brexit, and they're doing it again. And our PM has walked right into it, probably with eyes wide open and aware of what he's doing. There was only ever one motive behind his idea of a great EU-UK reset in relations, and that is to move us further back under EU control and once again subservient to the European Courts of Justice, the ECJ. And if it costs us our fishing grounds, the handing over of our armed forces and intelligence organisations to the control of the Eurocrats, as well as relocating the UK Independent Deterrent Nuclear Weapon Release Codes into the buildings of the EU Commission, then as far as Starmer is concerned, so be it. His Majesty's military personnel will be used at the behest of Brussels, and worse, any attempt to use them independently for our own defence purposes will require the sign-off of Brussels. And despite any strident claims by Number 10 and the Palace, any UK sovereignty over our armed forces will consist of a mere rubber stamp that agrees with EU Commission decisions. And automatically, along with that, will go control over our foreign policy and trade policy, because as part of the so-called deal, our PM would be required to just about pledge feudal allegiance to the EU's policies and aims to get there. But he'll cry, it will save us money so we can spend more on hotels for all the newcomers. He is also rumoured to be about to sign us up to all the EU agriculture rules too, something that will cause the ECJ to regain much of the jurisdiction it had over the UK prior to Brexit. And what does Starmer hope to get in return? Not a lot, as I understand it, other than increased access to the EU defence procurement system so we can, maybe, sell them more of our arms. But that will mean they will be telling us what weapons to produce and ensure they are all compatible with EU member state needs, and probably need to use, where applicable, the Public Regulated Service military navigation application within the EU Galileo satellite system. And I suspect all of this will cost us a lot of money to participate in. Just what Starmer would want. It may also give Spain yet another opportunity to try and lord it over us on the subject of Gibraltar. And given the foreign policy ties, the Falkland Islands would also be at higher risk. And with Starmer's rush to give the Chagos Islands away to Mauritius, based on a non-binding international court decision, I can see Starmer decolonising us very quickly with both the Falkland Islands and Gibraltar. After all, once they've shown you what they're like, believe them. I also have to wonder what this would mean for NATO, because we would be plumping for the EU joint military project that appears to me to be in direct competition with the US-led NATO. Now the Remoaners will be out trying to egg the PM to go as far as he can. They would rather he totally ignored democracy and just went over to Brussels to sign us back into the EU with a stroke of the pen. Whatever the cost to the UK populace. Because losing the Brexit referendum stings them. It really does. So they don't care the damage. They want back in, so as to take that sting away. And they keep coming out with erroneous statistics and one-sided echo chamber polls to try and convince us that rejoining is the right thing to do and something the majority wants. But that ignores the full-on, in-your-face proof of the opposite that is true. Firstly, one look at the EU economy, especially that of the EU engine room German economy, you see the grass is just as brown, if not browner, on the EU side of the fence. And secondly, the rising force in UK politics is not some woke rejoin party. No, it is Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage. Just look at the last local elections where both the Tories and Labour ended up having their vote slashed by 2/3. And that Runcorn and Helsby by-election that Reform UK won. Just that is enough to tell you that re-entering the EU is very far from the average voter's thoughts. Keep reminding all rejoin the EU types of that at every opportunity. Also, the Tory leader Kemi Badenoch has already said that if, as feared, Starmer gives anything away in his Great Reset talks next week, she will reverse it if elected to number 10. But Starmer and his negotiators will conspire with the EU to make that as hard as possible to do. Like making it a one-sided permanent arrangement with no get-out clause for the UK. I can see Starmer signing that with relish. But in an attempt to head this off at the pass, Badenoch sent a letter to the EU's envoy in London, Pedro Serrano, laying out 5 tests by which she would judge Starmer's reset. And if the agreement Starmer reaches with the EU breaches those tests, she wrote, "It is important that I stress that the next Conservative government under my leadership would not remain bound by terms that failed the 5 tests set out above and damaged the interests of the United Kingdom and its people." In my view, it is a given that any such deal negotiated by Starmer would do just that. But the Tories are not to be trusted either. Far too many closet EU-loving Lib Dems still remain amongst their ranks. Not just in Parliament, but also in the wider membership across the UK, from which the next tranche of their MPs will come. If they win any seats next time, that is. And Nigel Farage has also stated that he will tear up any abject surrender treaty with the EU that Starmer signs us up to. But Starmer's response to the Reform UK election victories is to promise to double down on his plans and go even faster. More woke, more net zero, more communist-style levelling down, and now more EU, no doubt. All to the delight of the WEF cabal and the Westminster elites. And of course the Brussels Eurocrats, who will have strengthened their grip on what they now regard as their first colony. Yes, the decolonising Labour Party will have successfully punished the people of the UK for their colonial past by turning us into the colonised. Finally, please like, subscribe and comment below, and a big shout out to our Patreon supporters, and thank you for watching.